People are afraid of Marx. Marx is like that four-letter word in the United States.
Invention of the middle class was the negotiated elements against the communist revolution.
Chicken fries went platinum with no features.
Yo! Welcome to another episode of Owls at Dawn. We are just two dudes from Southern California who studied philosophy, politics, and religion around the world and decided to start a podcast where we could bullshit with impunity. I am Austin Hayden Smith.
And I'm Troy Polidori.
Alright, and here we go. Well, last episode was week 10. This episode is week 11. There's nothing special to say about that, except that, nope, there's nothing special to say. Troy, you can just start yelling about shit.
11sies.
Yeah, that's right. All right, here we go. So we are going to start off this episode as we start off every episode with the Shitty Minute, where one of us rants about something that is pissing us off. And we just agreed before we started recording that we're not going to talk about Trump because we could talk about that every single week. But I feel like that's what every other human being is doing on the planet already. So this isn't Facebook. This is Owls at Dawn. We're going to talk about some cool shit. So Troy, what's your real Shitty Minute this week?
Yeah, man, the temptation to the dark side this week was strong. It was just way too easy to shoot that fish in a barrel. But I resisted that temptation. I'm going with the light side. Now, here's the thing. We're recording this on the weekend. And by the time you're listening to this, audience out there, you will have suffered through yet another Columbus Day. And that is an experience that nobody should have to live through. Columbus Day should not be a thing. This is not news to anybody, hopefully, but in case it is, Christopher Columbus was quite possibly the worst person in the world during his lifetime. He was a proponent of genocide, of mass rape of Native Americans. He was a murderer, in fact, more than a murderer, a genocidal murderer. And not only that, but he defended his actions as if they were utilitarian, as if they were best, as if they were obviously good. There wasn't even shame in his actions against Native peoples. And there have been some that have hypothesized that based upon his actions alone, something like 3 to 5 million people died through direct causes of his actions, who wouldn't have died if not for Columbus, let alone the suffering that comes from the sexual violence and slavery and whatnot that was the ramifications of his actions. It's just clear that we should not have a day that celebrates this person. Plus, it's not like it's an age-old American tradition anyway. Pretty sure Columbus Day is like less than 100 years old, and it was because a bunch of Catholic associations in America wanted a Catholic hero, and Columbus was like the guy. It's like nobody really gives a shit about this guy. Anyway, why do we need to have a holiday celebrating him? That's the more obvious point. Shitty Minute, we should not have to celebrate Christopher Columbus for any reason. It's a stupid idea. Here's the real issue, though. The obvious replacement for Columbus Day, because you can't just get rid of a holiday, you have to replace it, right? That's how things work in America, would be Indigenous Peoples Day. That's what everyone proffers up. And of course, that's what it should be, right? It should be Columbus's legacy that he gets replaced in history by a celebration of indigenous cultures over against what he tried to do to eradicate them, right? Here's the problem, though. Whenever we make a holiday to celebrate a figure or a culture that has been historically demonized and suffered greatly at the hands of American imperialism, it's really more of like a virtue signaling thing, right? Like, oh, okay, we solved the problem of that, and that's solidified. The bow is wrapped on top of that with a holiday. Look at MLK. We give MLK a holiday, then we just look at him in history as like the nice black guy. He wasn't anti-poverty. He wasn't anti-war. He wasn't anti-imperialism. He was just everybody kumbaya motherfucker, right?
Yeah.
That really pacifies the whole thing. So my recommendation is we need to celebrate indigenous cultures, but not in a way that's this bullshit virtue signaling kind of effect. So here's my proposal.
Sacrifice white people.
Possibly. That might be one of the rites and rituals of this holiday. Have you seen David Lynch's Twin Peaks?
Yes.
TV show from the 90s.
A long time ago, yep.
Yeah, which Showtime is actually rebooting, I guess, next year.
That's what I've heard.
Which could be amazing, because Lynch is involved. There's a character on Twin Peaks who's played by the actor Michael Horse. His name is Deputy Hawk in the show. And I remember watching this in college, I think it was, these reruns. with a bunch of friends, and Michael Horse was the coolest motherfucker in the room every episode, and he fits every stereotype of Native American. Like he speaks in like mystical reveries, and he's constantly in tune with nature, and he's really good with all these like, you know, wood-based weapons. It's like all horrible stereotypes, but he's so badass in the process, and he always wins that you can't help but celebrate him. So we should have National Michael Horse Day. Where we all just say lines that Michael Horse said in Twin Peaks and dress up like him and act as him. That way, we're celebrating something that properly replaces Columbus. At the same time, not doing some bullshit to pretend like we solved the problem, all the suffering that Native Americans have had at the hands of American imperialism for the past several hundred years, and even today, the current state of Native American tribes, which is definitely not what it should be.
Who's the actor that plays him?
Michael Horse.
Oh, that's the actor's name.
Yeah, that's his name. His name is actually Michael Horse.
Michael Horse. Okay. So now here's the question: Would Michael Horse somehow be involved in this? Like, or is he still alive? Did he pass?
Oh, he's alive.
He's alive. He will never die.
Everybody out there, go to Michael Horse's website. It's amazing.
Okay.
He does like Native American little trinket dealies. I don't know what like dream catchers and stuff. I don't know anything about that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But I think he like makes them or sells them. This was years ago that I remember this, but it was pretty amazing.
Okay. Yeah, I'm so down. I'm in. Sign me up. How do we do it? I'm ready.
I think Michael Horse probably knows we're talking about him. He seems like he would just have that ability.
He's got the sort of connections to the various dimensions of reality and whatnot.
Yeah,
he's like a shaman. Or now I'm being insensitive because I'm confusing my indigenous peoples.
And we'll learn all about this on National Michael Horse Day.
I'm so happy. You know what's funny too is Christopher Columbus wasn't even a good explorer. He went to the wrong place.
Hey, he was a fucking idiot on top of everything.
He was an idiot on top of it. I think I was it's Zinn's People's History of the United States, and he quotes like some guy that was at the time of the writing was like the preeminent Columbus scholar in the world or in America or something like that. And it's like this 800-page book, and it's like how Columbus was this amazing explorer and this amazing adventurer. And then there's like one line apparently where Zinn says that this guy basically says, yeah, and he did, there were those atrocities and things like that. But he basically just brushes it aside in this 800-page book, whereas Zinn is like, no, this guy's a monster. Like that needs to be the central thrust of understanding who this guy is and what his exploration was all about. He was a fucking serial killer.
Yeah, basically. Absolutely no empathy for the human suffering whatsoever.
No, not at all. Yeah. I wonder do you know when it actually did get instituted?
Columbus Day? I think in the Roosevelt, the latter Roosevelt. So not even 100 years ago. Not even 100 years ago.
Yeah. Yep. Don't worry, people. We still want you to have your day off of work. Or do you get a day off of work for Columbus Day?
I don't get jack shit. Neither should he.
Exactly.
All right, so that's the shitty minutes. We're moving on now to our main segment. We're going to be talking about the relevance of Karl Marx today. This came about through a piece from The New Yorker, which was written by Louis Menon. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But he's a contributor for The New Yorker, and he wrote an article that's been making the rounds this week called Karl Marx Yesterday and Today. It's half of a biography, or short, concise biography of Marx, and half of a bit of an argument for his relevance against some of the historical claims that in the past, in the 20th century, from British and American writers, that Marx basically failed in all of his predictions and therefore isn't relevant at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. You said that it was kind of making the rounds, and when you first told me about it, it hadn't been making the rounds in my feed until like yesterday, actually. And then Michael shared it. Michael O. Burns from This Week in Hip Hop. He shared it on one of his social media platforms. And then a couple other people started sharing it, and so it was interesting. When did it come out? Do you know?
Oh, I don't know actually. I figured it was earlier this week because that's when I started seeing it.
It was super interesting though. It was really well written.
Yeah, it was a good article.
Yeah, I dig it. I don't really read The New Yorker all that often, but whenever I do, I forget. I'm always like, oh yeah, I should read The New Yorker more often because they always actually do good shit.
Prestige essays. Fuck that, we got Twitter.
That's right. That's right. I got prestige 140 character tweets. It's so interesting too because obviously I think this hits to the heart of a lot of both our research because I don't know, it's hard. I think in some ways I can say that all of the research that I do sort of fits within some sort of Marxian lineage, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, in the wake of it, sort of, right?
Yeah. Sartre actually talks about this. Sartre says that we are living within the Marxist paradigm, and he doesn't mean like Marxist in the sense of like scientific socialism, like the article talks about, or like people who came after it, but this sort of paradigm shift that Marx inaugurated. And now to do philosophy is to do, he actually says that we're not philosophers, we're ideologists that are in the wake of Marx, who was the philosopher. And so that this time, and of course Sartre was writing in the middle of the 20th century, but in his time he thought that that was sort of, as you said, in the wake of Marxian philosophy, and so everyone who was doing sort of philosophical work were just ideologists within that sphere. And I feel like for me at least that's definitely an accurate sort of depiction of my interests and my thought. And yeah. I don't know, and I think probably the same for you as well.
Yeah, I think we should be clear that you reference that term scientific socialism, and usually when people reject Marx or say that he's irrelevant or whatever it is, it's that idea they're referencing, a pure macroeconomics perspective that you might call Marxist, which, I mean, sure, that's probably irrelevant today in the sense that no one's actually doing that. Okay, maybe. The real key for me is, the more philosophical foundation like you're talking about, which is what is the relationship between economics and social relations? That's the really broad Marxist question, right? Now, obviously, the Marxist lineage argues in some sense that economics kind of produces the social relations in a way. You don't have to necessarily have a deterministic viewpoint on that question to ask the actual question itself, which is what is the relation between those two domains. So that's why I think that even though I'm pretty sure you would argue Sartre, for instance, is not an economic determinist in that way.
Not at all.
He definitely is addressing that question of social relations and the way they impact and are affected by economics, right?
Yeah. So it's interesting because whenever I hear people talk about whether or not Marx is still relevant today, for me the answer is, well, obviously, because I think he was prescient for his day. I know that the author of this article was talking about certain biographers try to place Marx within the 19th century context in order to sort of redeem him, if you will, from certain misreadings, like you were saying. But for me, the relevance of Marx's ideas are never questioned. Not that I don't question them or haven't gone through that, but I mean, as of right now, because I've kind of already gone through it, and I kind of am just like, yes, the Marxian analysis or the Marxian position of criticism towards certain economic modalities, to me, that's just kind of standard. When did you first start reading Marx, I guess, and how did you get into him?
Oh, I think for most of us, you come across Marx first in college, right? I don't remember if it was in a philosophy class or in a history class or what it was, but you come across the idea, and of course everyone's heard terms like communism and Marxism and the Soviet Union and everything. And our kind of inclination in the beginning is to associate all those things as identical, right? And it's once you see the actual relationships, historical relationships between those things, those actors in history, that it really kind of grabs you. And I think probably you mentioned Zinn earlier, Zinn's People's History in the United States. I read that senior year of high school in my last history class in high school. And that really rocked my world. I don't remember if he ever mentions Marx, but you can definitely see the kind of 60s counterculture idea, which was influenced heavily by a lot of Marxists there.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that I actually found Marx through Zizek. And I think that was really how I actually came face to face with the real meat and potatoes of his work, rather than just, like you said, the caricatured understandings of, communism, socialism, Marxism, etc., which didn't really mean anything in any sort of substantial sense until I started studying Zizek. And then I believe it was even The Sublime Object of Ideology was the book, because that was something that was required reading for certain classes at our university.
We had the same class. Yeah.
Yeah.
Different times, though, right? I think.
Yeah, different times.
Yeah.
Different times. But so I think that's what it was. And then, you know what it actually really was for me? It was, I had a weird introduction to Marx, because I had it's similar to you, though, but I think from the average person who becomes a sort of reader of Marx, for me it was through the theological tradition. So it was actually through liberation theology that I really got introduced to Marx. In particular, a book by a gentleman by the name of Alistair Key. Did you ever read his book on Marx?
I know the name, but I haven't read that book, no.
Yeah, it's Kee, Alistair Key. And then, of course, the liberation theologians who basically take Marx and his criticisms of religion extremely seriously. And then his analysis of capital, they also take seriously. But for them, it starts with the critique of religion, as it does, I guess, with Marx himself. And then it sort of moves from there. But that was kind of my foray into it. And I kind of saw that what he was doing was, I think, something that was so similar to me. And I know we've talked about it a little bit on this podcast, but the idea that he starts by criticizing these ideological strongholds that are suppressing the freedoms of life, and then kind of moving on from there. And so he starts with critiquing religion, but then it also turns into a criticism of the state, which then in Capital, of course, turns into a strong analysis of the ideological strongholds of the economic means or the economic modes of production that determine social relations, which themselves are also sort of these adaptable or transformable ideologies, akin to his analysis that he kind of provides against religion as well, but now it's applied to capital, except for this, in this like really stringent sort of scientific analysis. Yeah, and then when I was in grad school, we actually did a reading group on Capital, and then when I actually read Capital for the first time, besides being just very difficult and intense, I remember that was sort of my I guess foray into Marxian thought.
Yeah, we should add, if anybody out there wants to slog through Capital, it's probably not advisable to just sit down and read it. You will hate your life. My way of getting through it was David Harvey, who is a political economist. He's British, right, I believe?
Yes.
He has a series of videos walking through the majority of the first volume of Capital. And that's a really good, helpful way to kind of walk through it with somebody who's kind of leading you along the way and showing the imports of a lot of the more technical and boring parts.
Yeah, and not only videos, but also audio versions through the iTunes store, which are basically like a podcast series, which are lectures that he – because I guess he teaches the class. He teaches the class on Capital every single year, sometimes multiple times a year, and he just records them or has recorded them previously. So
yeah, it's a really great resource if you're into that. One thing I thought would be interesting to talk about that Menon brings up in the article is, why do some people think that Marx is irrelevant today? And he brings up Peter Singer, who wrote, I believe in the 70s, that basically all Western democracies had made Marx irrelevant because none of his predictions came true. The main one being, for Marx, that communist revolutions would occur in the wealthy capitalist Western democracies. And they didn't. In fact, the opposite happened. They only happened in the poor agrarian areas, like in Latin America and in Russia, and not in the wealthy Western capitalist democracies. So if the opposite of what Marx predicted happened, then it showed that, I guess, the hypothesis is he had no idea what the fuck he was talking about. And that seems like a really terrible straw man. Not only is it also just like deductively invalid.
Yeah, and just it's hard to speak when you're in the middle of history and say that these things have not taken place yet. Because, well, first of all, there were many places, like I think at one point Menon says, there's like a third of the countries around the globe were in the mid 20th century were quote unquote Marxist to some degree. Right? Whatever that looked like may have varied depending on the place and the particular instantiation, but they were all sort of Marxist to some degree. But But on top of that, Marx himself was pretty aware, even though he was, I think, maybe a little bit more optimistic about how quickly the sort of global communist revolution would come about. He was very clear that capitalism was resilient and that it wouldn't just simply go away so easily. So the idea that there would be fluctuations, where there would be times when there would be a resurgence or something like that, or where there would be a pushback, or where the capitalist class, the business owner class, that they would not fight back, as strongly as possible, and that would take kind of hold. I mean, it seems to be kind of embedded within Marx himself. So it's almost like, all right, dude, you got to have a little bit more patience with the fact that history is unfolding and that history isn't this perfect, seamless transition. And I don't think that Marx was naive at all about thinking that it would be that way. So I don't know. It just seems like a bad reading of Marx, for one, but two, it also just seems like a bad misunderstanding of how history fucking works.
Yeah, to give a kind of small-scale illustration, I was reading something on Reddit this morning, I believe, about 3D printers, and there was a guy who, I guess, needed a part for his dryer that costs several $100s, and it was going to take weeks to ship.
Right.
And so he just went on Reddit and asked someone with a 3D printer to make this part for him, gave him the specs, and a guy had a 3D printer that lived like an hour away, and he had the part within 4 hours of this happening for like $5 worth of materials. And there's all this talk in the comments about, oh, wow, we're living in the future, right? Because 3D printers would give us this whole new world of efficiency and whatnot. And my first thought was, of course not. The huge problem is going to happen when 3D printers become ubiquitous is that we're going to have intellectual property over all of these parts.
Right.
And it'll be illegal to make them unless you pay whoever owns the patent for it. So that rent-seeking idea will still exist. That is the struggle between capitalism and the transition to socialism and eventually communism. It's that struggle over making the economic relations, or making the social relations, into economic relations. And that clearly is happening. Like, can anybody doubt that struggle over these things is actually occurring? But everywhere from the public domain to intellectual property to the commons, who joked earlier about, when we get to Mars, who's going to privatize the atmosphere first? That's what everyone wants all the billionaires want to race to get there, right? I mean, that's you can't. I don't think you can really argue in a genuine way that that's not really happening.
I think I told you about the book by Jeremy Rifkin that was called The Zero Marginal Costs Society, just in kind of our own private correspondences. And like I said, it's not the most amazing book in the world, but it is interesting in the way that it talks about the push of the maker movement, which a lot of people, for example, a guy by the name of Chris Anderson, are hailing as being the next great industrial revolution. And it will be this revolution where everyone with 3D printers and CNC machines and through the use of open source and open design and open access are going to be able to just create this sharing economy where goods don't cost things anymore, and that you don't have a breakdown between, or a sort of bifurcation between producers and consumers, but the producers are consumers and consumers are producers. So they're prosumers. And it'll be this sort of like flat egalitarian economic system of production and consumption. And he talks about it in this book, and he's very optimistic in the fact that he does think that this zero marginal cost society is approaching. And whether or not he's accurate is besides the point, but this kind of fits into it. If he is making these predictions, and yet they don't come to pass within 20, 30, 50 years, Singer's analysis to Marx would be like me saying, well, obviously Chris Anderson and all these technologists and people who are talking about the next industrial revolution, they're full of shit because it hasn't happened, and it won't happen because the world obviously doesn't work that way. And then they're basically just kind of doing a sort of Fukuyama sort of thing where it's like, history has already ended. We're already done. We already got this shit figured out, it's done. But I don't know, man. I think that there is something where if you look at, maybe I'm a bit more of an optimist than you are, but if you look at the way that the sharing economy is moving and the way that information technology is sort of making it so that all of this open access stuff can be shared without seeking the maximization of profits. I do think that there is a sense in which this type of technological innovation is leading in the directions that these theorists are predicting. And rather than, like, I'm not sitting there with bated breath waiting for it to come. I'm not saying like, we need to force it to happen, but I'm kind of just sitting back saying, why don't we just wait before we start making these final declarations either way? And that's what I think. It's just kind of like, why don't we just fucking commit ourselves to ideals within the process if you see injustices and then act against them, rather than be so quick to sort of try to make these absolute declarations of this is working or it's not working, or this new shift in this age has occurred, or this new shift in the age has not occurred. Why not just kind of commit ourselves to seeking better ways of structuring economic modes or economic paradigms and social modes and social paradigms? And then let's just have that be our worry. Because that to me is what Marx was doing. And that to me is what guys like Chris Anderson or Paul Mason in his book Post-Capitalism, or this guy Jeremy Rifkin, that's what they're doing. They're trying to commit themselves to the ideas of justice or the ideas of creating better social arrangements. And that's kind of it. You just start from there. And let's stop trying to sort of like, I don't know, put a doorstop in things. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I was thinking, when you were saying that, my problem with Singer's and many other arguments about the irrelevancy of Marx, it's not that Marx was obviously right about everything. Of course not. He made too many claims to be right about all of them. But when you dismiss Marx as being irrelevant because some of his predictions didn't come true, when the very reason they didn't come true is because of trenchant opposition to them coming true from these Western capitalist democracies, then that seems a bit disingenuous, right? It's not like he made predictions about closed systems and those closed systems didn't actually produce the outcomes they were supposed to. There was, give and take in all of this. If you look at the Communist Manifesto, the actual demands made in the manifesto, you have the progressive income tax was one of those demands. We got that, not to the extent that obviously was demanded, but we got a progressive income tax. Free public education, that was a demand. We got that, not always to the extent that we would want, but we got that. Public ownership of transportation in cities, got that to a large degree in a lot of places. A national bank with national ownership of credit agencies. In some respect, got that with like the Federal Reserve and whatnot. In some respects, didn't. The eradication of inheritance was another one. We got an estate tax. If you still think that inheritance is a good thing, look at who's running for president. And no child labor.
That's, yeah.
Pretty sure we all agree with that now, right? Those were all demands in the Communist Manifesto. Really, the only big one that didn't at least partially come true or was actually given in sort of a negotiation was the abolition of private property.
That's actually really interesting. I've actually never thought about it from that perspective. That if you actually think about it, the demands that are set forth in the Communist Manifesto, how many of them actually have at least been implemented to varying degrees throughout even, large-scale Western democratic capitalist places like the United States and the United Kingdom.
Yeah, if you look at it, it really sounds less like Singer's claim that, the communist revolution didn't happen in the Western capitalist democracies, so therefore everything about Marx's prediction was inaccurate, and more like it seemed like there was a negotiation. Like the Soviet Union existed, and it was an existential threat to the West, economically as well as militarily, and so the Western democracies after World War II negotiated with the proletariat, basically the working class, and they kind of went halfway or somewhere around halfway in a lot of these things to make sure that the actual revolution, the actual abolition of private property didn't occur. So if you look at it from that perspective, it looks more like everybody kind of went halfway in some respect. And so that's why we have the invention of the middle class essentially was the negotiated elements against the communist revolution. If the bourgeoisie had not allowed that, then you probably would have had revolutions in the West.
All I can think right now is I'm hearing Alex Jones talking about the ills of cultural Marxism and how that progressives are just trying to secretly implement Marxist ideals into the national minimum wage. That's just Marxist. And I'm kind of like, oh yeah, I guess it is.
Yeah, it ain't no secret.
Yeah, it ain't no secret, man. We're fucking trying. Oh, that's funny, dude. Well, so tell me what you think about this, because this is something that I think about quite a bit pertaining to just my own research and my own outlook on things. But like, I'm less interested in the actual predictions of Marx, like the normative moments in Marx, than I am with the underlying logic that he uses, or the the like diagrammatic paradigm of thought that he uses to analyze capital and to analyze the dominant ideologies that he saw that stifled freedom. So for me, it's less about, looking at the sort of simple phases that people try to extract out of Marx. You have capitalism, and then capitalism is going to lead to socialism once the workers take over the means of production, and then after socialism, eventually you're going to have the abolition of the state, or, Lenin talked about the withering away of the state, and then you're going to have full communism. And I'm less interested in looking at some people try to argue that there was not much normativity in Marx himself, but regardless of those sort of internal, more technical debates, I'm not really interested in that. I'm interested in the disposition of a rejection of these external ideological threats that stifle freedom, and then 2, what that leads to is his analysis of capital as being the most insidious, at least in his time, the most insidious of those ideological threats to human freedom. And so for me, that's what's important about Marx. And that's really, I just kind of want to, that's what I hold on to. That's what I find interesting.
Yeah, there's a couple of just really key kind of philosophical ideas that you can take from Marx, and that's really all you really need. I mean, to put it way too simply.
Right.
Like alienation. That's kind of what we're talking about in some respect here, right? Alienation from your work, alienation from social relations with other people, everything. And then surplus
alienation
value.
from yourself.
Yeah, alienation from yourself. And surplus value.
Right.
The idea of the thing you're creating, the value you're creating, then being taken by a particular class, and that creates class division. With those and a couple other simple concepts, you can really utilize the analysis of social relations in a Marxist kind of tendency or way. You don't need to get bogged down in very specific historical and economic predictions about what's supposed to occur.
Yeah. Now, real quick, just in case anyone's listening that is kind of like, what the fuck are you, surplus value? What are you talking about? I mean, we could talk, this is why you should go check out David Harvey, first of all, and check it out, because there's a lot of stuff that Marx develops that's that are these sort of technical terms that we're kind of tossing around right now. But do you want to just give a real quick little flyover of what do you mean by alienation? Why and how are people alienated? And then what is surplus value? Just real quick.
Do you think we should really do that
right now? I mean, or
stay big picture?
Just super quick. Like, what is it? So why is it that economic relations under a capitalist system, why are they alienating?
Okay, you take alienation, I'll take surplus value.
Okay. So we're not going to go into full-scale analysis of like CMC and MCM and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, definitely not going to do that.
Okay, so in a capitalist system, an individual does not own the product that one produces. So, for example, John Locke, who is a really influential Enlightenment philosopher and thinker, basically argued that a worker or a farmer needed to have the right of ownership over the product of one's hand. You work on it, it's yours. You're a farmer, and you farm some land, that land is yours. You're a chair maker, and you make some chairs, that chair, you own that. The output of your own product is something that you own. Under a capitalist mode of production, that isn't the case, because you don't own that product. That product is taken away from you, and that product becomes something that is exchangeable on the market. And who owns that product isn't the worker anymore, but the person who has ownership over the place of that product or that commodity in the market. And that is the capitalist class. So the capitalist class are the ones who invest the money into the workers and into the machinery and into the material costs and things like that. And they are the ones who own everything that is produced within their business or within their investment sphere. And so all the workers that are employed, they are merely selling their output to, or I shouldn't say selling, they're producing their output that then gets taken away from them by the capitalist owners, and the owners then sell that on the marketplace. So there's an alienation from the products that you produce themselves, because the output that you actually put your blood, sweat, and tears into doesn't belong to you. which means that everything that you do is taken from you. And so you are alienated from the very products of your own hands. And that goes for anything. And I know I'm talking about the simple things like chairs and things like that. That's more of like an obvious material. Like, I'm putting my hands into these chairs. But even if you sit down at a desk and you are thinking about building code for Google, your intellectual output is not owned by you. You are alienated. There is a distance between your product and your actual life energy, your power, your labor that you are putting into it. And so there's a distancing, there's a theft that's taking place as you are alienated from that. And so that creates certain psychological problems and certain tendencies of alienation from yourself. Go ahead, Troy. I can see you chomping at the bit to want to say something.
I was going to say I just don't want to forget to say something. The real key here is that this is not a negotiation. It's not a question about whether or not this is happening. You literally can either sell your labor or sell the products of someone else's labor. That's basically all you can do in capitalism.
Or you starve.
Or you starve and you die.
Exactly.
So you have to go out and sell your labor,
yes,
and involve yourself in alienation. You don't have a choice about doing this unless you're born with money, in which case you can just rent seek for your entire life.
Right.
And so that level of clear injustice and unfairness is at the root of the kind of problematic aspects of this. It's not like he's saying nobody should cooperate with one another. No, in fact, Marx kind of assumes that creation and cooperation are integral to being a human being. It's part of how we evolved as a species. And, millions of years of doing that have now become a short period of time where we no longer cooperate, but compete in many ways with others to sell our labor to the capitalists. And so that quick change in human history creates some of these problems.
Exactly. Yeah. And it needs to be said too that Marx wasn't just like a negative Nancy about capitalism. He recognized that capitalism was extremely useful and beneficial in creating the production of certain goods, and it was extremely useful in developing, energy and the steam engine and all these various things. And of course, if he were around today, he would be like, yeah, holy shit, look how freaking useful capitalism has been, creating the internet. And what has the internet done with all of this amazing stuff? Of course it's useful. That's not the point. It's not that it's not useful. It's that it is useful and it has been valuable, but it's damaging in what it's doing, and the fact that what it's leading to are social relations that themselves are conditioned by this alienating tendency. And so what happens is you're alienated from your product, but so are you, Troy, and I am, and Rachel here is, and our parents are, and the people that we exploit in the Southern Hemisphere, they're all alienated from all of their products, which means that every single human being on this planet is constantly stuck in this cycle of alienation, which means that how do we function with one another? Well, we function with one another in this sphere of competition as we're all sort of competing for jobs, and all kinds of various other, tensions that would create these alienating social relations. So we're alienated from our product, we're alienated from other people, and then because of that, we're also alienated from ourselves, and then we're basically just fucked.
And that's why we can't have nice things, is essentially the argument, right? This is why you have religion, this is why you have violence, this is why you have psychological trauma and issues. It's a bit over-determined, right? But it's kind of the bedrock of the whole argument here.
Right.
And just to follow that up, we kind of already explained surplus value a bit there. Surplus value is just the fact that you're creating these products and then their value is determined on top of your actual creation of them, in the sense that there's part of it that you don't get. You get paid however many dollars an hour for your work, and that is not equal to the actual value that you put into the product itself, because some of it's taken off the top by someone who owns intellectual property or the physical property or whatever it is. And that usually at some point, or always at some point, goes back to some form of what Marx calls primitive accumulation,
right?
Which is, how did that person get that property in the first place? You trace it back far enough, it's always going to end up with they stole it or they took it or whatever, something that's going to be considered not legal in a sense that it would be today. So you put it in practical terms. It's like, we call it working for the man, right? Why do you not like working for the man? Well, if your boss is literally working with you and doing all the same work and everything and is not taking an exorbitant salary, then you probably don't have a huge problem with your boss. You maybe even like your boss. How many people have that relationship with their boss? Close to none, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
People historically, I think there was a great study that was done, like a survey or something, that said people would sacrifice something like 20% of their wages to get their one higher up level boss fired.
Really?
Yeah, like the one higher up level boss from you is basically everyone's most hated individual.
Really? That's so funny.
And the reason is just it's the same thing, right? You feel like everyone feels like there's something being taken away from them by this person. Now, it's obviously not just the middle manager; it's the people who actually own the intellectual and physical property that are at issue. But our hatred for bosses is, I think, symptomatic of that truth, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know, and it's interesting. So now, kind of going back to the article, one of the things that he talks about that's so interesting is the sort of present landscape, because he talks about Thomas Piketty a little bit, and sort of some present analyses of economics that sort of fit within a Marxian trajectory, whether or not they're kind of commenting favorably or against or kind of tangentially to. But that, I think, is so important, and why this article is really interesting is that people are afraid of Marx. Marx is like that 4-letter word in the United States, right? That people, it's so scary. You talk about Marx and people are like, well, Marx is a bad guy, or Marxism is this evil thing, or something along those lines. But if you look at the world today and you see the status of inequality, and you see something like Bernie Sanders' campaign or Jeremy Corbyn's campaign here in the UK, and you see the sort of way in which the momentum behind these campaigns took off based on this argument that there is radical inequality in the world, people just kind of now, they are actually recognizing the sort of Marxian analysis of capitalism, but in a friendlier way. And I think it's okay, and I think it's time, and I think it'd be really useful to sort of continue to have this analysis, but do it in a way where we're also talking explicitly about Marx. And I don't think it's good to like whitewash it, Like I think it'd be really beneficial to sort of like really talk about it, because there's also so much other stuff that's in there that's rich that can help with further analysis, if that makes any sense.
What are you referencing with the extra stuff that would be helpful for analysis?
Well, I mean, personally, I just think it's really useful to talk about, like we said, not to mention it or to go into too much detail, but like the CMC MCM model. Like, how is it that that capitalism is different from previous economic modalities, and how is it that capitalism actually extracts labor? How is it that it extracts profit? Why is it that he wanted to argue for something that's called like the tendential rate in the fall of profit, which is the idea that profit does have a tendency to fall, and how profits will fall, and how when profits fall, aggregate demand will fall, and when aggregate demand falls, that's going to feed back into further falling of profits and things like that. So I think, the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, that's something that's really important to understand. I mean, you are seeing it right now in the world. Aggregate demand is down. Real livable wages in the United States are lower than they've been since the 1970s, which means that if that's the case, then people aren't buying. If people aren't buying, then that means that then there's overproduction. If there's overproduction, profits are falling. Costs are being racked up. So I think that's something that's important to understand, the tendential rate in the fall of profit. And then, of course, like I said, understanding exactly how it is that profits are extracted through the labor theory of value.
Okay, so is the idea that you're talking about basically when you see the Sanders and the Corbyn movements, it's focusing on kind of symptoms, like the 1% or whatever it is, or greed, maybe. And instead of that, or maybe complementary with that, look at the actual disease itself, the underpinnings that produce those symptoms.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that seems extremely important, right? Because just demonizing the 1% doesn't actually get you anywhere, because then you don't know how to change it. And you just remove the 1%, right? Or you get a new Congress or whatever, and guess what? They're the same as the old Congress. Actually changing the structures underneath that produce those symptoms is infinitely more important.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because I feel like with the success of these campaigns that we were just talking about with Sanders and Corbyn, it seems like now would be a time more than ever that Marx it wouldn't be such a dirty word. that people could talk about Marx. The problem is Marxism is like a scary thing because people just equate Marxism with Stalin, I think, and gulags and shit. But I don't know. Do you think it's a fool's errand to try to redeem the name, or like would you be cool with just being like, fuck it, we don't need to talk about Marx anymore? We can just like kind of subvert the ideas in couch it in new names, just insofar as we're retaining the sort of impetus.
Yeah, I go back and forth on this, man. I don't know about you, but at one time I want to be like, who really gives a shit? Let's just call it by a different name and have the same concepts. You don't have to like produce hagiography of Marx to make this thing work. At the same time, it's just, these ideas have existed for, 150 years. They're not new, and kind of reintroducing how they're not new and exactly why we ended up the way we have right now in our current state in, what we call late capitalism. It's pretty important for understanding how you might go about making it better. If you kind of just throw Marx away and throw the last 150 years of history away and try and start from the beginning, you have this I feel like you have this tendency to just act like we're kind of sui generis, right? We just came out of nothing as fully formed. And that's extremely unhelpful for trying to figure out how to make things better and more progressive in the future. I mean, you mentioned Piketty's Capital a little bit ago, right? Kind of the entire premise of that huge tome is that economic inequality that we see today isn't actually new. It's kind of integral to capitalism's dynamics.
Right.
Capitalism produces inequality, and it does not necessarily lead to your classic rising tide lifts all boats kind of a thing. The post-war era, the post-war boom, was really more of an anomaly.
Yeah.
And that's, if you look at it from the Marxist perspective, we basically just said that earlier, right? That was basically a negotiation to stop possible revolution from occurring. So we'll give them progressive income tax and public education and public housing and the Federal Reserve and all this kind of stuff as a way to stave off possible issues like we saw in Russia and are starting to see in Latin America. And that the last 70 years have been a slow eradication of that negotiated sort of promise.
Yeah. It's crazy to me that people would even really contest this analysis of capital, because even when you talk to people, right, like you say, let's bring this down to like simple terms, and it's like, people don't like working for the man or they hate their boss. I mean, it's also true that people understand with a felt sense of reality that like, hey, your boss, guess what they're trying to do? They're laying people off, they're tacking more work onto fewer people, and they're demanding an increased rate of production. And this is like everyone. I talk to my dad, and my dad is not a Marxist at all. At all. And he is like, dude, you're right. This is how it's going. They're laying off people at his job that are making solid wages, right, that have been there for a long time. And what are they doing? They're hiring some young kid who has 10 times more energy because the burdens of life and working for 30 or 40 years haven't been sucked out of him yet. So it's this young kid who's coming out of university. They can pay that kid half the salary, and they can demand 2 or 3 times from him because he's still trying to prove himself within the work setting, right? And so people are like, yeah, we totally get that. And then another way that if you actually own a business, or if you've looked at how businesses own or how they run, you know that they're trying to cut costs however they can. They're looking for cheap materials. They're looking for cheap labor. And anything they're doing, they're doing that so that they can maximize profit. So they want to pay you as little as possible. They want to pay materials as little as possible, which means if they're buying materials for as cheap as possible, the companies that they're buying for, those people have to cut they have to figure out how to maximize their profits and cut their costs. And if they're offering cheap material, how are they squeezing their margins? Well, they're doing it by laying people off, by using automation, by paying people less money, by outsourcing, by going to the Southern Hemisphere and, charging some Indian family or some Polynesian family half or a third or a tenth of what they would charge, someone in the Northern Hemisphere. And this is a systemic issue that you just see all over the place. And then when you look at that, you're kind of like, oh, yeah, that makes sense that is not exactly the best way to do things. And then if you just go one step further, and you say, now, if you realize that companies are just simply seeking to maximize their profits, and they're seeking to decrease their costs as much as possible, and that directly means that they're trying to pay workers as little as possible. That means that inequality is going to grow, and that business owners are going to maximize their profits, or at least maintain the rate of their profit. even though I would argue that it does kind of fall. But they're going to try to do that. That's what they want to do. That's their intent. And the way they do that is by squeezing the margins and sucking the costs out of their labor costs and their material costs and things like that. And that directly affects people. It's kind of like, yeah, that is just fucking apparent. You know, that's not anything that's controversial at all.
Yeah, to kind of wrap it up here, one thing I like to bring up with students whenever we're talking about kind of Marxism or communism, just in theory by itself, this is probably really like oversimplified and dumb, but I kind of like it. If you can imagine yourself living in the Star Trek universe, where you have replicator machines and that kind of technology, do you think with that technology and those resources, we would still have capitalism as we have it today? If you think yes, I would say that your response strains incredulity, in the sense that just seems like literally impossible. Like it'd be the most outdated, useless economic system to have, given that kind of technology. If you say, well, yeah, okay, I guess in that world, that's true, then my argument would just be, hey, we're closer to that than we were to industrial capitalism of the late 19th century, in the sense of the economic outputs and material resources and infrastructure that we have. So in that case, I think it's kind of somewhat of an indirect admittance that our economic systems need to update based upon the abilities and things that we have now. Whatever else you want to say about revolution and about state ownership and whatever else, just if you can at least get to the point where you admit, yeah, some of these systems are outmoded, they're unnecessary, they're not useful anymore, then that at the very least, I think, begins the process of considering, well, then how do we change them in the future?
Once again, I feel like I have been the meandering one, and then Troy comes in with a beautiful, nice little Star Trek teaching analogy to make it much more commonsensical. I appreciate that. By the way, I do want to say too, I can hear it sounds like some people are trying to intentionally fuck with our podcast outside your window right now. What's happening, Troy?
Yeah, it's driving me nuts. I'm kind of pissed off. This happens every Sunday. We're recording 3 hours later than normal, and then they planned it to happen.
It just started. Hey, so any listeners? Troy currently lives. I don't know if you want to say exactly where you are, but he's in the Los Angeles Valley. You should just write in and let's petition that works are done on a Sunday. You're not allowed to do fucking works like this on a Sunday. Assholes, put your... Oh, wait, no, actually, now I feel bad because they're people that need to make money. And they're being exploited by the capitalist system. And we just went through this whole thing about how people are being fucked. So, no, don't do that. Let them work. God damn it.
Everybody out here is supposed to be a Christian anyway, right? And they're working on a Sunday? Are you serious?
Yeah, what the fuck, man? What is going on? But you know what? I don't believe that there are no Christians anymore. Trump has made me believe that there is no such thing as Christianity. It never existed.
You won't believe how much this never happened.
That's exactly right.
All right, for our next segment, we are doing the Sticky Leaves, which is where one of us pontificates on whatever it is that's bringing meaning to this meaningless universe. This week, it's on Austin. What you got for us?
Well, as you know, I have dabbled with the entertainment arts for most of my life. Since I was a young boy, I started doing theater and then television and film and things like that. And I love performing still. I don't spend as much time, at least lately. I did for a couple of years ago, but in the past year or so, I haven't spent much time doing any acting. Although, actually, you know what? I'm lying. I did a music video and a short film last time I was in Scotland. But okay, I haven't been doing much theater is what I'm trying to get at here. And I had one of those YouTube rabbit hole experiences the other day where I started listening to a song from a famous musical theater play, and then that led me to another video, which led me to another video, which then led me to watching an entire production of a bootlegged video that someone recorded while they were watching a Broadway musical of this show called Spring Awakening, which I was in. I was in Spring Awakening for a very long time, so I don't know why I would feel the need to watch this. I know the fucking show, okay? But anyway, I had this rabbit hole experience, and it just reminded me of how much I love and how much I miss musical theater. And I don't just mean from a performing perspective. Of course, I am watching all this stuff, and I'm like, man, I gotta start taking voice lessons again, and I'm gonna audition for a play. Fuck this, I'm gonna audition for something. Yeah, I have those moments, but to be honest, more than anything, I think what I love is I just love the medium of musical theater. And what this rabbit hole did is it just reminded me of how much this particular art form, how impactful it's been to me in my life. And I don't know, I just think it is one of the most amazing and underappreciated art forms that's out there. And yeah, more than I just want to like encourage people. If you have not seen a musical, if you think that musicals are just like, I don't know, Oklahoma or Carousel or like a bunch of dudes running around in tights and you got a problem with that, I would just encourage you to check yourself before you wreck yourself and limit yourself from from a really amazing experience. I fucking love it. I mean, not only does it bring together two of my favorite things, music and acting, or music and drama, but it has the ability to tell stories in a way that is just different from most other art forms that are out there. It's not like television, it's not like film, it's not like dramas and plays either. And it's got something else because of that music element to it. And so I just find it to be a very unique and beautiful and wonderful art form. God, I fucking love it, man. It makes my life better. That's for sure.
Are you encouraging people to participate in music theater or just to enjoy it as a spectator?
All of it. I mean, just at the very least, enjoy it as a spectator, or at least give it a chance, you know? But shoot, I mean, if you're interested, if you've ever considered it, but you're like, oh man, but I'm in my 30s or I'm in my 40s or what am I going to do? I'm in my 20s. I've never done it before. You could do community theater, or you can take some voice lessons, or there are ways that you can express yourself in that arena that wouldn't necessarily be like, I don't know, impossible for you to get involved with it. But no, at the very least, enjoy it as a spectator. Just because I think that I think a lot of people, well, there are a couple of things. One, there's a lack of access because it's fucking expensive as shit to go see a Broadway show, or if you're in LA to go see a show at Pantages, or if you're in, I don't know, Cincinnati to go see a show at like a proper theater house, or Chicago, you know. So it's expensive. So there's a lack of access to it, for one. But on top of that, I think that there's sort of a bad rap with how people view musical theater in a lot of circles. You know, not always, not everybody. A lot of people appreciate them, but for those people that don't, I just would strongly encourage you to check some shows out. Check out your local professional or semi-professional production. Now, I will say, if you go see like some Amdram, which is, you know, amateur dramatic theater company's rendition of fucking Damn Yankees, that can be painful. That can be a little painful sometimes. I'm not gonna lie. Okay, having been in some of those shows before and having witnessed many of them, it can be painful. But if you can go see a professional production, you will see extremely talented actors, and you never know. You might surprise yourself. You might get to see an amazing story that has some sort of impact on you. And there's something about live theater that I think has a greater sort of empathic impact than television and film does. So, and it's a great night out, man. Go out in the town, grab some dinner, go see a theater show, and then go dance and sing on your way home, because that's what life is. Life is a musical, and you will turn your life into a musical, like La La Land or Singing in the Rain. It'll happen.
For anybody out there who thinks that Austin and I agree too much on this podcast, this should be your proof that we only agree because all of our ideas are correct, because we couldn't be more different, probably in the realms of like personality and some of the other stuff we like. There's basically nothing you could do to sell me on music. Almost
dude, what if it was a Slayer? What if it was a Slayer musical, bro?
I would just want to listen to the music then.
I was workshopping a show in Glasgow that was a metal musical, and it was like original metal music written by a guy who's a metal musician, and it was an adaptation of, oh my god, I'm trying to remember what it was. I workshopped it. I can't remember this, but it was something like the Scarlet Pimpernel, but it wasn't the Scarlet Pimpernel. What was it? Shit, I can't remember. But it was a music. It was a metal version, and the music was all like, "Wow!" It was gnarly, man. It was gnarly, dude. And then there were people like screaming and shit. I was like, "Whoa, okay."
Okay, I mean, I would never doubt that some versions of music theater could be entertaining. Yeah, in some cases. In most cases, for me, no. But in some select cases, if it's a thing you like, then you're going to like it.
Yeah.
That's like saying, if you put ice cream on top of Brussels sprouts, and then you eat the ice cream on top of it, is the ice cream going to suck now? Well, no, it's still going to be fucking ice cream. I actually like Brussels sprouts, so that analogy doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But hopefully it makes sense to the listener
Right.
out there. My thing is, it's nothing to do with music theater necessarily being bad. I could make that argument, and I have, but I won't because it's probably full of bias. And by probably, I mean definitely. It's just something about it, man. I like to believe I'm a polymath, but I just could not. That's just that thing I couldn't like ever make myself. And I'm talking about the popular stuff, like your Les Miserables and your Moulin Rouge and all the really, critically acclaimed, super popular ones that I know because I don't know anything about the, the actual history of music theater and stuff.
Right.
There's like nothing there that grabs me. I feel like my experience of it, and we're just talking phenomenologically here. I'm not talking about the essence of it or anything, is that the music isn't very good on its own because it has to fit into very specific tropes for the sake of the story. And so the music to me seems kind of lame and unoriginal in most of these areas. And then the story itself also, I feel like, has to be kind of contrived because there's so much emphasis on the music to stir the emotions rather than the actual drama. And so I feel like they kind of hamper each other, and I don't get anything out of either realm.
I can understand that.
How would you sell someone like me who experiences it that way?
Well, first of all, I don't think you're wrong. Many of the popular musicals are very saccharine and watered down. That many of them are. It's just a fact. My favorite shows were the ones that kind of came along and that tried to do something different, right? And what they did is they did something different musically, or they did something different with their story. So the show that I was just referencing, Spring Awakening, is a musical adaptation of a Wedekind play from the early 1900s, I want to say, in Germany. He was a German playwright. And the play itself was banned in Germany for over 100 years. So automatically, that tells you that there's something kind of edgy about this. And the reason is because it is a story about a bunch of young men and women coming to grips with their burgeoning sexuality. And at the same time, they're in a restrictive and stifling Protestant Christian school and community, and it's about them rebelling against that and seeking their own freedom and seeking their own self-expression. As artists, as scholars, young sort of researchers and thinkers, the main character, Melchior Gabor, is very intelligent, and he wants to challenge certain readings of texts and things like that, and he gets punished for it. And then, of course, they're coming to grips, like I said, with their own sexuality, and that comes with its own shit as people get pregnant, and then abortions are happening, and then people are chasing after them, and then people die, and then it's just tragedy. And then the music that undergirds it is all rock music, and so it isn't just the sort of typical orchestral arrangements that people are accustomed to in the sort of more popular musicals, brass and things like that, or synthesizers like Phantom of the Opera or something. It uses rock guitar and rock drums, and the songs themselves do have some interesting standalone qualities to them. Now, is the music? I mean, I know you like someone we were talking about last week, like Tom Waits or Dinosaur Jr. Is it that unique? No, not this particular musical. But I do think that there's room. That's the thing, is that's what I think is so amazing. I think that there's room within the genre of musical theater to do something like that, where you take music, like if you had Tom Waits that were to write a fucking musical, whether he was writing the lyrics or not, I don't know, but like you could do something that would be really unique and interesting musically, but that also has a narrative element to it. And so
yeah, he did. It was called Alice.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, and the album is awesome, and I don't know anything about the actual dramatic version.
Oh, no shit.
Because I just like the album.
Oh, see, now I'm intrigued. See, now you just taught me something about that, and I want to go check that out. But that's what I would say, is that I think that there's space for creativity, and so I think that there are shows out there, like when Rent came out in the early 90s, that was a show that just rocked everybody's world because it was an adaptation of, obviously, La Boheme, which is a really famous opera. But the subject matter I was talking about, the AIDS crisis in New York, and that was obviously a really important, influential, impactful kind of cultural phenomenon that needed to be discussed. And then the music, it was a rock musical. And so the way that it was done was something that was unique and that it was different. Now you go see Rent and it's kind of commonplace because it's been around for 20 years and everybody knows it and everybody knows the songs and it's not that interesting and it's not that unique. But at the time, dude, that shit, like everyone, that it rocked people's worlds. Just like right now, you've got Hamilton that is the new musical that everyone is freaking out about. Now, I haven't seen it. I've only read reviews about it, so I really can't comment on it. But it's supposed to be another one of those sort of groundbreaking, turning the corner, adding something different, because it's a hip-hop musical in a lot of ways. And so there's something really interesting about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it is, but I've heard a lot of the music from it, and it's like it's not good hip-hop. Like, on its own.
Right.
It's not at all good. And like, I love Daveed Diggs, I think he plays Jefferson, right? And he's in Clipping, which is a great hip-hop group from LA that I love, and their music is fantastic. Check out their new album. By the way, it's awesome. And just the music isn't really good. It's kind of cheesy. It's really cheesy hip hop, which is fine because in that context, it's supposed to be entertaining for different reasons. I get that. I guess, I don't know. It's just hard for me to separate that out and not just see either the music or the drama or both as being subpar quality. Like, think of The Rite of Spring, Stravinsky. That's fucking amazing musically. It's like earth shattering. For anybody. I mean, it's like it was metal before metal existed in some ways, with dissonance and quality of loudness and stuff. And I have like zero desire to see like a ballet with the Rite of Spring going on in the background, right? Just not going to happen. And that's not like being a misogynist or a chauvinist or anything. It's just like
That's just not your thing. Well, this is what I would say then. I would say the only thing that I can suggest that would maybe help to cross that divide that you're having, or like to sort of harmonize the dissonance that you're experiencing, is that to just go and experience it. And I know that's going to be the hard thing, because you're automatically going to be sitting there, and in your own mind, you're going to be judging it. You're like, this music isn't that great, and the story isn't that great. It's half story and half music, and that just means it's a half performance. But I think that would be the only thing I could say, is that if you do have those reservations, I totally get it. I think you just got to experience it. And if you have those reservations, definitely do not go see an amateur dramatic society's rendition of Damn Yankees, okay? Because then you will be turned off forever, and then I'm going to be bummed out. But try to go see, if you can, a solid production of, if you're going to see a popular musical, there are some that are out there that are probably going to be more interesting than others. I'm not a big fan of the old classics. I mentioned them earlier, like Carousel, Oklahoma, South Pacific, shit like that. Like, yeah, I can take that shit or leave it, man. I mean, I had to study that stuff when I was in school before, because I actually, in another life, I was a musical theater major. So I studied that shit. I don't like that stuff. I'm more interested in, like I said, the sort of spring awakening. There's a show called Tick, Tick, Boom that was really interesting and kind of important in the 90s that came out. There are plenty of shows that are out there. I'm a big fan of Phantom, because the Phantom of the Opera was the first show that I saw when I was a little boy live. I was like 8 years old or something.
Yeah, same for me too.
Yeah, so it rocked my shit, because I'd never seen anything like that. So I have an appreciation for Phantom, even though, like, if you actually talk to like straight up musical theater heads, they're like, yeah, it's weak. They're like, the music is pretty weak.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure it is. Yeah,
it's all just repetitive, and Andrew Lloyd Webber ripped off other people and shit like that. People they kind of like to rip on Andrew Lloyd Webber anyway a lot of times. But Stephen Sondheim is an amazing. He's a brilliant musician. Actually, his music is really technical. So some of his shows are fantastic. So Sondheim, this guy named Jason Robert Brown, who's contemporary composer, who they kind of compare with Sondheim quite a bit, because he's very technical and very complex in his musical arrangements. His plays, he has a show called The Last 5 Years that's this relationship drama that's very intense, and he's a very talented musician and composer. So check him out, give it a shot. But for me, God, man, I love that shit. I love it.
All right, I can't promise I'll try, but I'll try to try.
That's good enough. I'll take it.
To like the next thing you recommend.
I'll take it.
I will do that for you.
Deal.
Just for you.
I appreciate that, brother. All right, sick. Well, now that we have Troy's promise that he's going to go see a show, because that's what he just said, right? He promised. He said, I will do this. Thank you, Austin. I am going to go see a musical. I'm so glad he said that. Now that we're doing that, we're going to move on quickly before he can talk anymore, and we're going to go on to bullshitting. And this week in bullshitting, we are going to talk about baseball, which was America's pastime, but now I feel like nobody gives a fuck about baseball anymore except for Troy.
That's one way to intro it. Yeah, for sure. So here's my bullshit about baseball. You tell me what you think, because we're on the opposite sides now. I love baseball. You can kind of appreciate it, but aren't really digging it. Maybe we're kind of switching places from the musical theater thing now. Would that be accurate?
I mean, I like baseball. I just don't take the time to actually like enjoy it or watch it that often.
Yeah, well, you like everything, so this is probably like the bottom level.
That's true.
This is your version of being hostile towards something.
Yeah, that's true.
So you tell me, what are the like bullet points, 1, 2, 3, why baseball just does not excite you or get you going?
It's a little slow. It's long as fuck. And to me, those are two different things. Like, it's slow in terms of just the actual excitement of the game, the pace of the game, the stuff that's going on in the game.
The pace, yeah.
Yeah. And it's long as fuck. The games are like 3 hours, 4 hours long if it goes into extra innings. And I just don't think the idea of like taking a stick and hitting a rock and then running is all that interesting. To me, like, one of my favorite sports is hockey because it's just fast and it's action-packed and like people fight each other and that's like encouraged. So like that's cool. I like that. That's why I can't stand soccer or football for the European fans because like it's encouraged to take a dive and be a little baby. Like, fuck you. If that's encouraged, if that's a strategy of your sport, you're doing something wrong.
Okay, so let me try to answer that with the best of my ability.
Okay.
Here. So the pace idea. I actually think that the pace is part of what makes it great. Now, you know me, baseball, I do love baseball, but it compares in no way to my love of basketball, which is like my first passion as even a child.
Right.
And that has the quick pace, and it's very, the analogy people use for it is like networking, right? It's quick and dynamic, and there's constant decision-making happening all the time. And I love that aspect of basketball, which I think no other sport really captures in the same way. We don't have to go down that road. Baseball is like the opposite. You're not supposed to be immersed in baseball so much as you kind of sit alongside it. So it's kind of happening alongside you, maybe as you're reading something or as you're working on something or listening to music or whatever it is you're doing. Now, during the playoffs, it's a bit different. I think it's a little bit more engaging because everything is so weighty and important.
Right.
There's 162 games during the season. You can't really be immersed at every moment without like becoming obsessed and having like psychological issues. So, and it happens during the summer for a reason when, you know, historically we're supposed to have more free time, and it just happens during the day usually, you know, at least back before we had the technology to have night games. And that was, I think, pretty cool. It just kind of happens alongside the rest of your life, you know? You got work and you ask what's the score of the game and you figure it out, and that's what happens. With that, you have the dynamic of the pitcher-batter dynamic, I guess, is really interesting. It's fully strategic in the sense of you're changing, if you're the pitcher, you're changing the eye level from high to low. You're trying to make the batter believe you're going to throw a fastball, but you actually throw a breaking ball, and it's going to fool them. And they're in such a small margin for error, because if you throw your breaking ball, but it breaks 1 inch less than it usually does, then the hitter's going to smash that.
Right.
So little margin for error. And the strike zone itself is like, you can actually throw a ball within specific inches.
Yeah.
That are, 60 something feet away from you?
Well, yeah, and remember there was
remarkable.
that article that I don't remember if you sent it to me or I can't remember, but basically that it's like scientifically impossible to hit a baseball or something like that. Wasn't it something like that? It was like it should be physically impossible to hit a baseball with the amount of like reaction time, actually predicting the pitch, how fast it's coming, and then the fact that the like engaging your fast twitch muscles to actually try to make contact with it. It should be impossible, but for some reason it's not.
Yeah, you can't consciously do it.
Yeah, you can't consciously do it. That's what it was.
Yeah, you have to have some learned behaviors that end up resulting in your ability to hit. Yeah, I found that whole thing fascinating. Like the Japanese, I think I have a friend who lives in Japan, and he's remarked that, I don't know if this is stereotyping or accurate at all, but the reason the Japanese love baseball so much is because they love this sort of battle between pitcher and batter. And like it goes back to some like, you know, ancient Japanese ideas. I don't know like what exactly, between this kind of strategic battle that happens between people, but it's fully bent on rules, and it's not like celebratory or anything. It's very stoic, and I really enjoyed that whole process. And nothing cooler than seeing nasty ass breaking ball, just fool a guy and have him swing out of his shoes and fall onto his knees.
I do like it. I do like when a nasty
embarrassing shit.
or when the nasty breaking ball comes up and it looks like it's going to hit the dude in the head, and you see him kind of lean and you see him like lean back, and then it just lands perfectly in the strike zone, and he just sits there frozen, but his knees kind of buckle just a little bit, you know, like that.
Yeah, it's such a great comparison to like in basketball if you dunk in a guy's face and you put your crotch into his face,
Right.
or in football when you just like run over a guy.
Yeah.
Right. It's very clearly about physical domination, whereas when you throw a nasty ass breaking ball, or you throw a changeup and the guy swings before it's halfway there, then that's just like some, I don't know, man. That's some like old school shit right there.
Like some voodoo psychological shit.
Yeah, that's like some ancient slap you with my gloves, go to a duel out in the backyard kind of shit.
That's so interesting. I'm assuming that you're talking about Austin in Japan, right?
Yeah.
So that's another Austin, but it's interesting what he says about baseball, sort of having the roots with the sort of like Japanese like battles or something like that. It's almost like there's a mythology in baseball.
Yeah, it's probably a total stereotype, but if you actually watch, because the MLB goes to Japan usually every year to play a couple games, if you watch the way they respond, it's totally different than the way American audiences respond, spectators.
Really?
Americans are like drinking beer, having hot dogs, talking during the game.
Yeah.
It's all just kind of, whatever. The Japanese are fully engaged. Like every pitch, nobody talks. It's like being in theater, almost. And then whenever there's an out made or a hit made, there's a slow clap, just like that. It's very much more like theater than it is for American audiences, where it's just kind of humdrum every day.
If I could get into it like that, that would actually be really interesting. If I had a sort of theatrical or narratival attachment to it, I bet you that would change it up. Because you're right, me, for going to a baseball game, I grew up going to a baseball game and getting Cracker Jacks and eating nachos and getting hot dogs. And then when I got older, it was about drinking beer and just hanging out, right? So I guess maybe it was just the way that I cultivated my experience with baseball that made it so that it's kind of like, I kind of pay attention. Like I say, I'm an Angel fan, but like if the Angels win the World Series, I'll celebrate and have some beers with some homies. But if they lose, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, okay, so then here we go. So playoffs are in the early stages here. What are your predictions? Are the Cubs finally going to break the curse? What has it been since 1908?
1908.
Are they going to win? They were the best team in baseball this year. Are they going to win?
Of course not.
Of course not.
Baseball hates the Cubs.
Okay.
God hates the Cubs.
Who's going to?
No, I mean they're probably going to win.
You think?
But then they're also not. So who knows?
Well, no, I hear your team, the Sox, are pretty good, right?
Yeah, let's not go there, dude.
Why? What's going on?
They're down 0-2 already. Going to get eliminated tomorrow.
Oh no, they're already down 0-2. Okay. So what? Like, if you had, what are your basic prediction? What's going to happen? Who's going to be in the World Series?
I'm going to say Cubs, and man, I hate to say it, but Blue Jays.
The Blue Jays. Okay.
And the Cubs are going to win.
And the Cubs are going to win.
Prediction.
Right here, you heard it. Troy is predicting the curse of. Is it the curse? It's not the curse of the Bambino. What curse is this?
I just thought it was just the curse.
The curse.
They're just the Cubs. They're their own curse.
The curse of the Cubs is ending in 2016.
Michael would know this.
Michael would be happy about this. He is a Cubs fan.
Yeah, he'd know what the curse is actually called. We got to ask him that.
Yeah, we'll have to ask him.
With first-class legroom, big cocktails for everyone, and a schedule you can depend on.
Well, I guess on that note, fuck it. Let's kick it over to Michael for This Week in Hip Hop. Yeah, Troy?
Yeah, what's up?
Hey, what's up? It's This Week in Hip Hop. Michael Burns. I'm glad to have you here. I guess shouts to Austin and Troy for the general enthusiasm about the Chicago Cubs. I am a lifelong Cubs fan. I think they're going to take this first series, but we'll see. Knock on wood. But I'm nervous, if I'm honest. And here's what I'm nervous about. I'm nervous about what it'll mean to be a Cubs fan if they win the World Series. Because that redefines the conditions of character necessary to being a real Cubs fan. I think there's something to be said for rooting for a team your whole life that has never won a World Series. I think it builds a certain sort of character, gives you a realistic set of expectations, and makes the game fun in itself. I'm just kind of worried that, there's already a lot of asshole Cubs fans. A lot. And I'm worried it might get worse. But we'll see. But I'm supposed to talk about hip-hop, so I'll stop talking about baseball, which might be the least hip-hop sport of the major sports. So this week, I'm going to be honest with you. Don't at me. But nothing came out this week that had me really excited. Nothing that I feel like I want to talk to you about. So I'm going to give you some rap thoughts. I have thoughts about a couple things. And then I'm going to do something today. I'm going to respond to a request. And I'm going to review a music video based on a request. So first rap thought. And it's a question. It's, why do people defend bad rap? There's this thing that people do. I mean, like every 3 months, some Twitter debate pops up where someone wants to say that like Lil Wayne is the best rapper alive, or that J. Cole is the most important artist of a generation, or God forbid when someone wants to defend the validity of the eardrummers, backwards guys, or whoever else it is. And like, I don't say this from a position of hating that music. I like so much shitty rap because it's fun to listen to. And often some real ignorant rap can be perfect for the right mood. And you know, no one wants to listen to hyper lyrical underground rap in a club setting. But like when I eat shitty food, and for example, I really love Burger King chicken fries. I think they're one of the most interesting foods you can get. And anytime I'm in an airport, there's a lot of BKs in airports, I try to get the chicken fries. I love them. But if you come up to me and say, dude, why are you eating chicken fries? That's a shitty food. I'm not going to say no. No, chicken fries went platinum with no features. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say, oh, you're totally right. These are really shitty, and I'm going to feel bad later, but they taste really good. If you put some other food in front of me that's a lot better, I'm going to acknowledge that that's of a higher culinary status. So I just don't get why we feel this need to defend bad rap. I mean, and the weird part is that gray area. And here I'm thinking of artists like, and I'm sorry, it's the most obvious example, like Drake and Kanye, who in some cases get defended like they're the two most important artists in music. But other people sometimes, I feel, especially more traditional hip hop heads, have to roll their eyes at some of this stuff. I mean, whether it's Drake saying he turned the 6 upside down, it's a 9 now, or Kanye talking about getting asshole bleach on his t-shirt. We should just be able to acknowledge that artists like that sometimes make genuinely like bad music that's not impressive at a lyrical or musical level, but fuck it, we still like listening to it. So that's my first thought. My second thought, and it's related, is that I feel like, so there's a new wave of rap fans, right? There's a lot of people, especially people in their late 20s, early 30s, who did not grow up listening to rap music, who like rap music now, and that's awesome. I think it's good that a lot of people listen to it. I think it's good that artists are getting money. But I think there's this weird thing I've noticed where a lot of these people have really, I wish I had a better word than this, very soft taste in rap music. They like sort of, and I'll say it again, like post 808s and heartbreaks kind of emotional rap, which is fine. But when you come in through that, I feel like a lot of people have neglected the type of hip hop that has always been a cornerstone of both the genre and the culture, which is that gritty, usually East Coast style rap music that's built on dusty sample-based beats and gritty descriptive rhymes. I was thinking about this week because Digging in the Crates came out with a new video and new song, and it's shockingly good. And this is, for those of you who don't know, this is like Fat Joe's original group, where Diamond D started out. It's just like an old school New York group. And I just, watching that, I was reminded that like, I like that and I need this. I mean, I think we talked about Danny Brown last week, who I think carries the lyrical style of that genre, of that gritty street rap, but using a more contemporary style of production. But I think it's sad, I'm just going to say, to see this kind of, I'll say it's like the Drake and Ye-ification of rap culture, but really it's post 808s. Now, I'm not saying that dudes that live in mansions in Calabasas and travel exclusively via private jet can't make good music, but I'm saying that they can't get anywhere near the sort of grittiness and visceral storytelling and boastful lyrical style of traditional rap music. Now, some might say that we can't always be listening to things from, 95 to 2001, but people are rapping like this now. And some of these artists, I'm sure you know, but just in case, I mean, Freddie Gibbs is an obvious choice. West Side Gun and Conway out of Buffalo. And they might be some of the best people rapping words together right now, working with some of the best producers. So if you haven't listened to West Side Gun and Conway, both solo and collectively, do that. A good entryway is the Griselda Ghost project that's on SoundCloud. You can listen to it for free. Vic Spencer out of Chicago is a nice anecdote to some of the overly earnest artists coming out of the Windy City. So check Vic Spencer if you haven't. And of course, New York is always producing these type of artists. When I say New York, I mean New York City. My two favorites right now of that genre might be Dave East and Action Bronson. And yeah, I dare another white person to tell me that Bronson isn't one of the nicest people out right now. I just dare you. He is. I don't give a shit if he's a goofy Albanian guy that has a cooking show. He can rap and rap well. And of course, even my favorite song of the year so far, I think represents this style, which is Groovy Tony track on Schoolboy Q's album with Jadakiss. It just represents that hardcore, gritty style of rap music that I think we need. But that's all. That's my rant. Now to the review. My cousin from Baltimore, Virginia Byrne, asked me to review the new Bruno Mars 24 Karat Magic video. I did this. It was extremely confusing to watch this video. And I had a lot of questions, like, in general, what is happening? And then I'm wondering what is going on in Bruno Mars' life. And to be honest, I'm wondering how much cocaine he's doing. Because I know this guy got arrested for cocaine usage before. And he's a little guy, so I don't know how that cocaine is affecting him. But watching this video and listening to the song, it's like 5-2 Hawaiian G-Funk mixed with him rapping. Bruno Mars rapping with the lyrical dexterity of like the Sugar Hill Gang. It's just so bad. And there's this line where he says, blame it on Jesus, #blessed, and like throws booze out of a communion chalice at a woman. It's not chill. And then he like throws money with his boys while they're riding old person scooters. It seems kind of like a Lonely Island move. And there's lots of asses. Just there's asses throughout this video. And it makes you think of Bruno Mars as someone that's like, see how straight I am, guys? I'm so straight. I have 100 asses in my videos. I'm definitely straight. Which makes you wonder. It just makes you wonder. But I'm curious to see people get into that. But man, it was just a really confusing music video to watch. I guess he seems like a guy that's just having a good time, but he's kind of drifting into rap culture in a really weird way. I don't know. I didn't like it. And I guess I'm kind of mad at cousin Virginia Byrne for asking me to do that, but family first. Even if it's fake family, it's still real family. Okay, that's all for me, though. I'm done this week. I will catch you soon. If you want to talk to me via Twitter, it's at Mick _ or O _ Broin. Username Big Body Stress. Go Cubs. Eat protein. Stay hydrated. Bye.
Cruising the sky as smoothly as a bird, you scarcely realize you are traveling.
All right, thanks, Mike. Hey, Austin, you know that chicken fries went platinum with no features? You hear about that?
I did just moments ago.
Yeah, that was a pretty great line. Mm-hmm. All right, then. That's the podcast for this week. If you guys could go on to Instagram or Twitter, follow us at owls _ @_Don. Hit us up there. Any questions? We're thinking about doing a Q&A episode in the future, so we'd love to hear from you. Other than that, go on iTunes, rate and review us. 5 stars, hopefully. Give us a review. Help us get the podcast out. We greatly appreciate it. Alrighty?
Yes, yes.
Das Vidania, Amerikanski.